picture the modern startup hub for a second. You know, like the exact vibe.
The wildly expensive cafe in Palo Alto.
Exactly. Everyone's sitting around in like vintage Adidas and perfectly distressed denim. They're sipping pour-over coffee, throwing around phrases like fast failure or pivoting out of disaster.
Right, projecting just this absolute unshakable confidence that
Mhm.
they're the next billionaire.
Yes. But, I mean, here's the statistical reality. Most new businesses just fail. Most entrepreneurs fail. And even the ones who succeed go through absolute misery to get there.
Yeah, it's definitely not all pour over coffee.
No, it's really not. In fact, if you look at the data from Y Combinator, which is basically the most famous startup incubator in the world, the main reason startups die isn't even the competition.
Wait, it's not.
No, it's that the founders just get totally demoralized. The rejection, the bounced checks, the endless grinding, it just, it kills their hope.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
So if that's the stark reality, we have to start our deep dive today with one massive question. Why on earth are so many people desperate to do this?
Well, to understand that drive, we really have to look at how our brains deceive us. There's this brilliant concept from the economist Daniel Kahneman for exactly what you just described in that cafe.
Okay, what's he call it?
He calls it WYSI-80, which stands for what you see is all there is.
Oh, what you see is all there is. Okay.
So when you're surrounded by other people launching ventures, all projecting that swagger you mentioned, your brain actually filters out the invisible graveyard of failed companies.
Because they're not sitting in the cafe with you.
Exactly. You only see the survivors. It becomes this highly intoxicating, just heady brew of exaggerated optimism. You watch a few TED Talks, you read about a billion-dollar tech acquisition, and suddenly you are completely blind to the actual mathematical odds.
Which means, like, all those inspirational quotes pasted on the walls of co-working spaces are essentially just a contagious form of ignorance.
I mean, if we were being entirely objective, yeah, those posters wouldn't say shoot for the moon. They'd show a picture of a founder getting a third eviction notice.
Right. That's a little dark, but yeah.
But here's the twist, though. This exaggerated optimism actually serves a crucial evolutionary purpose for the business itself. Because once a venture is actually underway, a completely rational assessment of the odds would just paralyze you.
Oh, interesting. So you kind of need to be delusional.
A little bit, yeah. That mildly delusional confidence is the exact mechanism that helps a founder, confidently raise money or convince highly talented employees to take a pay cut to join them.
It's how they mentally survive the daily beatings.
Exactly.
Well, that tension is exactly why we're pulling from the book How to Think Like an Entrepreneur by Philip Delves Broughton today. We want to cut right through that Silicon Valley swagger and the romanticized myths.
Yeah, get to the reality of it.
Right. The goal of this deep dive is to uncover the true psychological traits, the actual timelines, and the underlying survival mechanics of an entrepreneurial mind.
Because once you understand the actual cognitive wiring at play, you can apply this thinking to your own career, even if you never plan on pitching a venture capitalist.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this. Usually when we think about entrepreneurship, we think about it like buying a really expensive lottery ticket, right? We just define it merely as starting a business.
Yeah, that's the default assumption.
But the book argues we need a total reframe here.
We do. And the most useful reframe comes from a Harvard Business School professor named Howard Stevenson. He defined entrepreneurship simply as the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled.
Huh. Notice what's missing from that definition.
Right. There's no mention of incorporating a company, and there's no mention of being a risk junkie either.
Yeah, people always assume entrepreneurs love risk.
But they don't.
Yeah.
True entrepreneurs actually abhor pointless risk. They aren't taking risks for the thrill of the gamble. They take the exact calculated risks necessary to move toward a specific goal. There's this quote from the writer Gustave Flaubert that applies perfectly here. He said, "Be regular and orderly in your life like a bourgeois, so that you may be violent and original in your work."
Oh, I love that. It totally shifts the image from a reckless gambler to something much more calculating. It sounds less like launching a tech app and more like running an audacious political campaign.
Yes.
You're calculating, you're gathering resources on the fly and relying on absolute perfect timing.
That political analogy is incredibly apt. And it's actually why the author uses Barack Obama's 2008 presidential run as a prime case study of pure entrepreneurship.
Oh, interesting. And just to be clear to you listening, we're not talking about the politics here, left or right. We're just looking at the mechanics of the campaign itself.
Exactly. Just purely from a strategic standpoint.
Yeah.
Think about Obama in the mid-2000s. He'd barely been in the U.S. Senate for 2 years. He lacked the traditional financial resources. He lacked decades of foreign policy experience.
He didn't even really have the support of his own party's core establishment at that point.
Right. But what he did have was an accumulation of encouraging evidence from the crowds on his book tour. And, frankly, a profound boredom with the traditional sausage factory of legislation in the Senate.
Wait, so the argument is that he was acting like a frustrated corporate middle manager who just saw an opening in the market.
That is exactly it. I mean, his advisors were deeply divided. The traditionalists were telling him it was too early, that he needed to build his war chest and wait his turn.
Right, the safe route.
But the entrepreneurial minds in his camp realized that the window of opportunity to run for president opens and shuts incredibly fast. If you wait until you have all the resources lined up perfectly, the market has moved on. The window is gone.
Which is so true in business, too.
Yeah. And before he announced, his eventual campaign manager, David Axelrod, actually warned him. He said, "I think you have ambition, but not that kind of pathological drive you need to win." But Obama made the entrepreneurial decision anyway. He leapt through the window, trusting that Stevenson definition. He pursued the opportunity, assuming he would acquire the resources, the money, and the staff along the way.
Okay, but that leads to a massive practical problem. I mean, if you are leaping through windows without a safety net, how do you actually survive the fall?
Yeah, that's the big question.
How do you keep the lights on and pay your rent while you are furiously trying to gather those resources?
Well, you have to solve what the book calls the material question. And doing that requires a highly specific type of cognitive wiring.
Okay, what kind of wiring?
To illustrate this, the author shares a wild story about the mystic George Gurdjieff. So in 1899, Gurdjieff was traveling by train through modern-day Turkmenistan.
Okay, setting the scene. 1899.
Right. And he makes a wager with a fellow traveler that he can make a large sum of money by a completely arbitrary, fast-approaching date.
Just out of nowhere.
Just a bet. So he gets off the train in a town called Ashgabat. It's this young, affluent town full of retired government officials who love buying new European gadgets to feel sophisticated.
But I'm guessing they don't know how to use them?
They have absolutely no idea. So their houses are just full of broken novelties. Gurdjieff rents a little space and hangs a sign that says something like American Traveling Workshop. Here for a very short time, makes, alters, and repairs everything.
Oh my gosh, so people just start bringing him all their broken junk.
Everything, from cherry stoning machines to typewriters. And Gurdjieff realizes immediately that most of these machines aren't even broken. They're just misunderstood by their owners.
Wait, really?
Yeah, a wealthy local brings in a sewing machine, and all it needs is a lever pressed on the side. A regimental commander brings in a huge batch of typewriters. They just need their ribbon spools rewound.
Let me guess, he doesn't tell them that.
Of course not. He claims it'll take days of painstaking labor. He orders imaginary replacement parts, and he charges them an absolute fortune. He wins his wager and makes a massive pile of cash.
Okay, wait, I'm following you on the resourcefulness, but Gurdjieff sounds like a straight-up con artist here. Are we really saying the foundation of entrepreneurial survival is just swindling people?
No, no. The ethics of Gurdjieff's specific actions aren't the model here. What we're looking at is the cognitive mechanic of survival.
Okay, clarify that for me.
It's about looking at the reality of the board in front of you. In his case, a town full of rich, ignorant gadget owners, and figuring out how to extract the resources you need to survive today.
Ah, I see.
That constant hustle to answer the material question is something every entrepreneur faces when the bank account hits zero. But answering it successfully isn't about being a scammer. It requires something psychologists call cognitive complexity.
Cognitive complexity. Okay, let me try an analogy here to ground this for you listening. Rather than thinking of intelligence like lifting weights at the gym, think of cognitive complexity like being a bilingual translator.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Because if you only speak English, there are certain concepts or emotions you literally cannot perceive because you just don't have the vocabulary for them.
Right, you're limited by your single framework.
Exactly. But if you also speak Japanese, your brain is cross-wired. You can see a situation, realize there's a Japanese word that perfectly solves the emotional puzzle, and translate it back to the English speakers who are completely stuck.
Yes.
It's the ability to see relationships between totally different fields because you inhabit more than one reality.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The historian J. Rogers Hollingsworth actually studied hundreds of Nobel Prize-winning scientists to figure out how this cross-wiring happens mechanically in the brain.
And what did he find?
He found that the most groundbreaking thinkers almost always internalized multiple cultures. They didn't just visit other fields, they lived on the borders between them. And he found that marginalization is a massive driver of this.
Marginalization, like being an outsider.
Exactly. When you are pushed to the edges of a culture or forced into awkward social positions, you develop incredibly fresh perspectives. You're forced to synthesize ideas that the comfortable specialists right in the center completely miss because they never have to translate anything.
So discomfort literally forces the brain to build new pathways.
Yes. The evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson is a profound example of this mechanic. After his parents divorced, he was passed around from home to home.
That sounds incredibly destabilizing.
It was. He felt completely isolated from human relationships, which just felt unpredictable and unsafe to him. So he retreated to the margins, to the swamps and the woods.
Wow.
And that painful isolation forced his brain to seek predictable rules in nature. He didn't just look at a swamp and see separate bugs and plants. His mind sought the underlying architecture of the whole system.
Right, looking for the connections.
He eventually sought what he called the unity of knowledge, gluing back together specialized fields of biology and sociology that had been artificially separated by academics.
And it doesn't always have to come from childhood trauma, right? I mean, the book mentions that you can actively pursue this cross-wiring through what Hollingsworth called mentally intensive avocations.
Yes, hobbies that really push your brain.
Like Einstein, he always credited his breakthroughs in physics to the intuition he nourished by playing music. It's all pattern recognition. He'd hit a wall with a mathematical equation, sit down to play Mozart, and the musical structure would give him an intuitive feel for the harmony of the universe.
It let him see the math from a completely new angle.
Exactly. He was using one language to solve a problem in another.
Precisely.
Okay, so you've built this complex, cross-trained mindset. You know how to hustle and translate between worlds to solve the material question. But what fuels the engine?
What do you mean?
Like, when the venture capitalists are saying no, when the bank is bouncing your checks, cognitive complexity doesn't keep you warm at night. What actually keeps you from getting demoralized?
Well, the book says the answer is simply wanting it. And that brings us to the very complicated role of greed.
Okay, but I want to push on this. What if you listening right now aren't some passionate tech nerd trying to change the world and you're not someone who wants a private island? What if you were just trying to pay off your student loans?
It's a fair point, and it requires us to look at the different flavors of this drive. Take someone like Bill Gates, for example. His drive wasn't raw cash.
It wasn't.
No. A student once asked him how to get as rich as he was. And Gates said that above a certain level of money, it's the same hamburger.
The same hamburger.
Meaning, once your basic freedoms are secured, extra millions don't change your daily reality. His advice was to find something you're absolutely obsessed with, hire your friends, and if it has a massive impact, financial independence might follow.
Right. But compare that to Riccardo Tisci, the famous designer who completely revitalized the fashion house Givenchy.
Oh, his fuel was totally different.
Entirely different. Tisci grew up in southern Italy, the youngest of 9 children, and his father died when he was 6. His driving force wasn't a passion for a specific artistic impact. It was a visceral, terrifying fear of returning to poverty.
The survival instinct.
Exactly. When he was a student in London, he wanted a very specific model for his graduation show. Her agent said no, but Tisci just kept coming after her relentlessly day after day, refusing to accept the rejection.
Wow.
The model eventually gave in, and she later said he acted like an obsessed psycho artist like Van Gogh. He was greedy, yes, but he was greedy for escape. He was greedy for basic survival.
Which eventually evolves into a fierce demand for self-determination. You just don't want anyone else pulling your strings ever again.
Exactly.
And that brings us to J. Paul Getty's concept of the millionaire mentality.
Huh?
Getty wrote these essays for Playboy magazine back in the day, and he clarified that this mentality is not about penny pinching.
What is it about, then?
It's about being profit-minded, cost-conscious, and unapologetically individualistic. He argued a person with this mentality could wear a green toga, drink yak's milk, and vote the vegetarian ticket.
A very specific image there.
Very specific. But as long as their competence was unquestionable, no one could dictate terms to them.
But let me challenge this for a second. Getty contrasts this individualist mentality with what he calls the corporatists, people who value harmony, social consensus, and, staying in their lane.
Right?
He compares them to unmotivated postal clerks. But most people listening right now are probably sitting in a perfectly safe corporate job, paying their mortgage and raising their kids. It sounds a bit arrogant, right? Like
Yeah.
Getty is looking down on anyone who just wants a predictable Tuesday. Is being a corporatist actually a bad thing?
It's an important pushback. And no, society and the economy absolutely rely on corporatists to keep the trains running on time. There's immense value in stability.
Okay, good.
The distinction the book is making isn't a moral judgment. It's about what you optimize for. Corporatists optimize for safety and preserving the existing pie.
Right.
Individualists, the entrepreneurial minds, optimize for meritocracy and mobility. They want to bake a new, bigger pie, even if it means enduring a massive amount of turbulence and chaos to get there.
So it's a trade-off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They ultimately have to make a choice. Do they want to be rich or king? Do they give up control of their creation to a corporate board just to get incredibly wealthy and safe? Or do they hold on to their independence so they can rule their own, perhaps smaller domain?
Okay, so if this drive for self-determination and this incredible cognitive complexity we talked about, if all that takes decades of cross-training and living on the margins to build, why is our default mental image of an entrepreneur a 22-year-old kid in a hoodie?
Honestly, it's a myth manufactured by the venture capital industry and amplified by the media.
Really?
The press just loves stories about teenage millionaires, like Nick DeLuizio selling his app to Yahoo for $30 million, or Mark Zuckerberg starting in his dorm room.
Yeah, those stories are everywhere.
And venture capitalists, like the famous Michael Moritz, openly praise founders in their early 20s. Because, as Moritz put it, they have no boundaries and no family distractions.
But Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, called that out, didn't he?
He did, brilliantly. He was on stage with Moritz and basically exposed the financial mechanics behind the myth. He pointed out that VCs like young founders because they are cheap, malleable, and willing to work themselves to death.
Wow.
VCs invest in a portfolio. They fully expect 9 out of 10 of their investments to fail completely. They're just looking for the one unicorn that pays for all the failures.
So they want to minimize their risk.
Right. They want to put in as little money as possible,
Yeah.
extract as much equity as possible, and have a founder who will literally sleep under their desk. An older, experienced professional with a mortgage and a family just isn't going to accept those exploitative terms.
Which means the VCs aren't buying youths because youth is inherently wiser. They are literally buying cheap lottery tickets. And the actual data backs this up. Did you know the average age of a first-time American entrepreneur is 40?
Yep.
70% are married and 60% have kids. That statistic should be incredibly liberating. If you are past your 20s and sitting in a cubicle, you haven't missed the boat. You're actually entering your prime.
Because the reality of entrepreneurship follows an inverted U-curve of productivity. It requires a really delicate balance between youthful energy and older competence.
What kind of competence?
Well, it includes what economists call human capital and tacit knowledge.
Yeah.
The invisible mechanics of business you just can't learn in a textbook, like how to manage difficult personalities, how to navigate Byzantine regulations, or how to build genuine trust with a supplier.
Right. The book uses a great analogy with Roger Federer here. In his later years on the tennis court, he couldn't rely purely on the explosive, limitless speed of a teenager. He had to blend the cunning, anticipation, and emotional control of a veteran with whatever physical energy he had left.
That's the perfect balance.
Yeah.
And when you rely entirely on energy without confidence, you end up with the early days of Google.
Oh, man, the story in the book about this is wild.
It is. So Larry Page and Sergey Brin are these brilliant young kids pitching a $10 billion revenue idea to John Doerr, the legendary VC.
Okay.
They get a $100,000 check from an early investor, and they literally forget to deposit it for a month because they don't even have a corporate bank account set up.
Wait, really? They just left $100,000 sitting around?
Just sitting there.
Yeah.
They were completely consumed by the engineering puzzle, but almost entirely dismissive of the actual business mechanics.
That's terrifying for an investor.
Oh, John Doerr knew it was incredibly dangerous because he knew one of Larry Page's greatest historical fears was ending up like Nikola Tesla.
Tesla.
Yeah. Tesla was a brilliant pioneer of electrical power, arguably a purer genius than Edison, but he lacked the tacit knowledge to build a sustainable business model around his inventions. He died poor, living in hotel rooms, completely consumed by paranoia.
So the VCs had to intervene to save the company from its own founders.
Yes. Dürer pushed them to bring in what he called adult supervision. They hired Eric Schmidt, who had a PhD in computer science, but crucially, also brought decades of hard-won corporate experience from Sun Microsystems and Novell.
Ah, so he had the tacit knowledge.
Exactly. Schmidt brought the competence to balance Page and Brin's boundless energy and technical vision. He spent a decade building the actual corporate machine that captured the immense value of their search engine.
So the ideal formula is energy colliding with hard-won competence. But what happens if someone doesn't hit that perfect balance until they are way past 40? What if the cognitive complexity takes decades to simmer? Have they missed the window entirely?
Not at all. And the architect Frank Gehry is the ultimate proof of this. Gehry is a legendary name now, but he spent most of his career fighting in the margins. When he was 25, he was offered a job by Richard Neutra, one of the biggest, most established names in architecture.
Okay, sounds like a great opportunity.
Except Neutra wanted him to work for free as an unpaid intern.
Ah, the ultimate test of the corporatist path versus the individualist path.
Exactly. And Gehry, being fiercely independent, turned it down. Instead, he spent decades marginalized, straddling the worlds of art and architecture. The traditional architects mocked him as an artist because his ideas weren't rigid enough.
Right. And the fine artists probably dismissed him as too technical.
They called him a plumber because he constantly had to worry about municipal fire codes, load-bearing walls, and handrails.
Yeah.
But just like E.O. Wilson in the Swamps, Gehry drew immense cognitive power from that marginalization.
He used that cross-wiring.
He did. He wrestled with the material question for decades, nearly going bankrupt, forced to build with cheap, undesirable materials like corrugated metal and chain-link fencing.
And his ultimate breakthrough perfectly illustrates that bilingual translator analogy we talked about. He was trying to figure out how to give a massive building a sense of fluid movement and decoration, but without relying on traditional, boring columns or arches.
Right, he was totally stuck.
So his brain crosswires, and he starts looking at one of the oldest life forms on Earth, fish.
Wait, fish?
Yes.
Mm.
He noticed how their scales glinted in the light and suggested rapid movement even when they were perfectly still.
Oh, wow.
So, using his cognitive complexity, he synthesizes the biological aesthetics of a fish with the rigid plumbing and fireproofing requirements of a public building. But to actually build it, he had to borrow language from a third world aerospace.
Because of the curves.
Exactly. He utilized CATIA, which was a highly advanced computer software originally designed for fighter jets, to prove to the contractors that his crazy swooping curves wouldn't just collapse.
Amazing.
The result is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. It's a building covered in titanium scales that fundamentally changed the global landscape of architecture.
Right.
And he was 69 years old when it opened.
69. Decades of simmering before his energy, his cross-trained complexity, and his competence hit absolute critical mass.
So let's wrap this up. Entrepreneurship is not about the Silicon Valley swagger, and it is definitely not about being a risk-addicted 20-something genius in a hoodie.
It's definitely not.
It's about intentionally building your cognitive complexity by exploring the uncomfortable margins. It's about humbly solving the mundane material question so you can survive the gap between leaping through the window and hitting the ground.
And it's about finding out what your personal hamburger is, what truly drives your demand for independence.
Yes. And balancing your raw energy with the hard-won competence that only comes from years of experience.
Which leaves us with one final thought to mull over for you listening. The economist Edmund Phelps noted that true economic and personal growth requires embracing what he called the topsy-turvy of creation, the frenzy of development and the painful closing of old, comfortable ways.
I love that phrase.
Yeah. And in his essay, Self-Reliance, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote about how the true individual must resist the easy default settings of modern life. So look at your own career right now. What is the default setting you are blindly accepting? Are you acting like a corporatist, desperately protecting your small, safe slice of the pie? Or are you ready to embrace a little turbulence in order to actually grow?